Welcome to Investigate Joe Rogan, the podcast where I investigate claims made on the Joe Rogan Experience. Today I'll be looking at episode 1379 with Ben Westhoff. Overall, I would say that this episode is accurate in the broader statements that Westhoff makes about the opioid epidemic, but obviously nobody can really know if he is telling the truth about these sort of little specific stories he mentions about how he interviewed this drug dealer and he saw this lab in China. So I'm just going to be looking at the general stats and things that he brings up. Maybe it's just me being overly paranoid, but there's a part of me that doesn't believe these interviews really happened. I think it's because later in the interview, Westhoff says that he wants there to be a narrative and he wants to tell stories, which to me gives off this scent of gonzo journalism and that sort of nonsense. But that really could just be me being too paranoid here. I did, however, enjoy when he was telling the story of the one deep web drug dealer who he heard tests all his drugs himself, so that if it's a bad dose, he'll die before he can sell it to a customer. Now he's an ethical dealer and all this stuff. And then Rogan just says, all drug dealers and addicts and stuff all have their own, mental gymnastics where they justify everything, right? I enjoyed that dose of reality. I'd also like to say that I think it would be pretty cool and aesthetic if at some point in the future the drug dealer from Shanghai who he supposedly went and met and saw his lab and everything, if that guy finds out about this book and who Ben Westhoff actually is and killed him in the future, if you've read the book, the cyberpunk book Snow Crash, they talk about how what the Yakuza does is when someone disrespects them, they ignore it for 2 years, and then they kill you out of nowhere when you think you're in the clear and you think you forgot. So I think Westhoff should probably look out for this in the future. Then once the podcast sort of gets going, they talk about famous people who have overdosed, and he says that Tom Petty OD'd on fentanyl that he just got from a random guy outside a show. I could not find anything to back that up. He really did overdose on fentanyl, obviously, but I couldn't find anything that said he just got it from a random dude in a crowd. I think that's sort of a disrespectful way to mischaracterize someone's death. Then they sort of get into the broader topic of the opioid epidemic, and if you're looking for another good podcast episode about that, you should listen to the Radiolab episode called The Good Samaritan that has a bunch of interviews with EMTs and stuff, and it's pretty interesting. The first little thing that I wanted to clarify was this question was left open on the show. Jamie never pulled it up, like I believe he was told to. But cat, the Somali pirate drug, is indeed illegal in the United States. So don't go around LARPing as a pirate. You will go to jail. They sort of start to touch on the idea that China could be allowing this stuff intentionally as a sort of shadow warfare against America. And he points to specifically China increasing the tax rebate on some of the chemicals that are used to create fentanyl. And this is true. They really did bump it up a little bit from 9 to 10% during the trade war, or sort of the height of the ongoing trade war. However, they didn't just do this out of nowhere. The US had raised tariffs on chemical imports from China. So you could just say this was a Chinese response to that. But I think it is possible that this is intentional on China's behalf, but I wouldn't say this is, you can't really point to this as a smoking gun, but it is a possibility. He then says that fentanyl kills more people than car accidents and guns. Now, this is not true, but I think he just misspoke because the broader point he's trying to make is true. So these numbers are from 2017 because you can't really find solid numbers for 2018 yet. But in 2017, fentanyl killed 28,000 people. Cars killed 37,000 people, and guns killed 40,000 people. The gun number seems pretty shocking until you realize that 60% of those are self-inflicted, which is even sadder in a way, but sort of makes the world seem like a less dangerous place, I guess. But probably what he meant to say was that opioids in general kill more people than cars and guns, which is true, because 47,500 people died of opioid overdoses in 2017. And then if you want to just look at total drug overdose deaths, that's 70,000, which is way more than cars and guns. But also, if you want to just start talking about preventable things that kill people, diabetes killed 83,500 people in 2017. And 90% of that is type 2, which is the preventable one. So, just if you're going to play that game, I would like to throw in diabetes, because I think that's an underrated killer, to be sure. Westhoff also mischaracterizes the Democratic presidential candidates' stances on the opioid epidemic. He sort of just says, like offhand, oh, they all just want to sue Big Pharma. Nobody's really talking about it. And it might be true that they're not talking about it enough. Well, when you look at the high death toll. But they do have more fleshed out opinions than just sue Big Pharma. So Biden wants there to be a big public health care option, sort of like super Obamacare. And he says this would increase treatment availability, and he wants to spend more on treatment, and he wants there to be treatment focused on more over incarceration, and then also he wants to sue Big Pharma. And then Warren, Bernie, and Harris have all co-signed on the same bill that would increase the federal spending on treatment by $100 billion, which would be a massive increase over the current level of spending. They want to focus on treatment over incarceration as well. They want to create injection sites, like Ben Westhoff mentioned. And, of course, they would say that public health care, which the three of them support, would cover treatment for opioid addiction. And they also want to sue Big Pharma. And then Pete also wants $100 billion for treatment. He wants to force private insurance companies to cover treatment for opioid addiction. And he wants to decriminalize all drugs on a federal level, which was another thing I feel like Ben Westhoff would support. And then he also wants to focus on treatment over jail time. Yang, as usual, has weird opinions about this. He wants to boost funding like everyone else, but he also wants victims, quote, sent to mandatory treatment centers for 3 days to convince them to seek long-term treatment, unquote. I don't even know what that would look like exactly, but that's certainly not just sue Big Pharma. He also wants a retroactive tax on Big Pharma, and he wants to decriminalize opioids specifically. So there's all kinds of plans out there in Democrat land that aren't just suing Purdue. To me, it seems like the actual solutions that Westhoff proposes would not be very helpful. Injection centers, in my opinion, is basically the worst of both worlds. Drugs are still illegal, but now the government is paying for people to do them. And then decriminalization, I really don't see how that would help very much. It just seems like sort of a half measure to me. It doesn't solve the cartels and the massive power they have. It doesn't solve accidental overdoses because of fentanyl being in stuff it shouldn't be in. It doesn't solve people overdosing, period. I really don't see how decriminalization is going to do much. Rogan, as always, is, quote, agnostic about legalization, but I really think that his prohibition comparison is totally true. And I think if you just look at the core of the problem, you should just ask yourself, why should something that doesn't violate anyone's rights be illegal? Why? What is the purpose of a law? I think it sort of gets at a more philosophical question. I think the way to convince Democrats that you should legalize drugs is to look at abortion, and you say, well, we should legalize abortion because if you ban it, people will just get sketchy abortions in like Mexico or whatever, right? And they'll agree. And you say, well, it's just like that with drugs. And then to convince Republicans, you say, well, we shouldn't ban guns because then people will just get guns illegally and criminals will still get guns, right? And they'll agree. And you say, well, it's just the same case with drugs. However, I don't see drugs being legalized anytime in the near future because there's no candidate that supports it. After general opioid epidemic talk, they get into more just recreational drugs in general talk. And Rogan brings up some miracle cures that any frequent listener will know are a common topic. The biggest one is Regenokine, which he recommends as the cure for degenerative disc disease and basically any ailment the guest comes on the show with. The first thing he gets wrong about Regenokine is that Regenokine is not stem cells. They do not shoot stem cells directly into your spine. What Regenokine is they take blood out of your body, manipulate it, and then they put it back into you. And it is not a miracle cure. The evidence is sort of sketchy. There are studies where it seems to be effective, but then there's also studies where it's not better than a placebo. So the jury is kind of out. It could turn out to be successful in the future, but there's just not really enough evidence right now. But he usually just mentions like sort of anecdotal stuff with like various athletes, and then proceeds to recommend that everyone fly to another country to get Regenokine. The other miracle cures that he brings up in this episode, among many other episodes, are ibogaine, which he says is great for substance addictions. Kind of just like Regenokine, the jury is still out. There's not really enough studies on enough people to know if that's true. MDMA curing PTSD is in the same boat. It's still a big scientific maybe. You can actually go online and look at, they're recruiting people for studies on it right now, actually. And then ayahuasca can help you quit substance abuse. Rogan says it's very successful. Same thing again, there's some small studies, but it's far from being confirmed. Now what is confirmed, and I was shocked to learn this. I had heard this many times on JRE and just always assumed that it was not true. However, DMT really is produced by the human body. I couldn't believe it. However, the somewhat crazier claims made by internet people about this fact are not true. The quantity of DMT that has been found in blood samples and things is not enough to actually produce any psychedelic effect, not even close. It doesn't have anything to do with the pineal gland, aka your third eye. And in general, it's just sort of a mystery. Scientists don't know why it's there or how it's there. So I gotta give Rogan this one. This is actually true, and I needlessly doubted him. Another frequent Rogan comment that was made in this episode is that being the president is an impossible job. He said, quote, "Being the president is an impossible job. There's just no way one person can control every aspect of our civilization," unquote. I've heard this on many episodes, and what bothers me about it is that that's not the president's job. The president's job is not to control every aspect of civilization. But I think this sort of points to a broader problem with how people view the president. The modern president is really weird because he has way more power than the founding fathers ever would have wanted, but he has way less power than the public seems to think that he has. The president basically gets blamed for everything. You know, the economy is doing bad. Oh, Obama tanked the economy. Thanks, Obama. And then the economy starts doing good. Oh, Trump, he saved the economy. Thanks, Trump. But the president does not single-handedly steer the economy, nor does he control every aspect of civilization. This opinion has led Rogan to suggest crazier things in other episodes, like just direct democracy via smartphone, and hopefully at some point a guest comes on and tells him what the president's actual job is. After this, they start talking about 90s hip-hop, and they mention crack babies, which they say aren't a thing, which is kind of true. It is true that there are no specific symptoms that relate directly to a mother having smoked crack while pregnant. But smoking crack while pregnant does cause premature birth, birth defects, ADHD, and like a bunch of other unfortunate things. But in general, it's just thought to be as bad as tobacco. It's similar to smoking, but actually not as bad as alcohol. So you'd actually be better off smoking crack than you would be drinking alcohol while pregnant, which was quite surprising to me. I would have never guessed that. They continue to talk about music for a while, 90s hip-hop, Nas. Rogan says that music from 2009 and 2019 is basically the same, which I think shows that he really keeps up with contemporary music. He really knows what the kids are listening to. Talk about exercising is good for you, etc. And then the last real error that's made is an interesting one, where Rogan says that 150 people are killed by falling coconuts a year. Now, this is not true, of course, but it is a myth that has some interesting lore behind it. It was popularized by shark researcher George Burgess, who was trying to make sharks look good by comparison. You know, sharks only kill a couple people a year. Look at coconuts. Those things are dangerous. And he got this coconut stat from Club Direct, which was a British travel insurance company. And they got it from a 1984 study called Injuries Due to Falling Coconuts that appeared in the Journal of Trauma. Now, this study references just a handful of anecdotal coconut-related injuries. No fatalities, certainly not 150 coconut deaths. So it is thought that this insurance organization just sort of made up the 150 coconut deaths number to make sharks seem safer, to sell people on like traveling to South Africa and stuff. So it's really a weird fact that apparently still exists in the public consciousness because Rogan is telling it to people on the internet. That's really all the notes I would have on this episode. Overall, it was pretty informative, pretty factual. I think, again, if you're interested in this topic, the episode of Radiolab, The Good Samaritan, is really interesting. And hopefully, as I move forward here, I'll be able to make episodes faster. I'm kind of trying to aim for like one a week. I think that seems doable. And in the meantime, be sure to take everything you hear on JRE with a grain of salt.
I think people would be surprised.
Really? You think so?
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd be surprised.